Hi, I'm Jonathan Byrd. Thanks for tuning into my podcast. Today, I want to tell you how to use a pro camera. It's easy. So easy. If you want to look at the images that I reference in this podcast, just go to jonathanbyrd.substack.com. And this particular issue, this article is called How to Use a Pro Camera. It should be easy to find. And if you're on my email list, you will also get this in an email with all the images that you can follow along. You have this sexy camera someone gave you for Christmas, or you inherited it, or a photographer friend upgraded and you said you'd like to try it, but it's been sitting in your closet staring at you like a glass cyclops. You pick it up and spin that little dial on the top left. M, A, S, P. If it's a Canon, it's even weirder. M, A, V, T, V, P, B. There might be some little icons of people skiing, a flower, or a generic face. First, forget auto, A+, and the icon modes. By the end of this article, you'll enjoy photography much more without them. Then, let's talk about the exposure triangle. Many photographers have mysteriously disappeared and never come back from the exposure. The exposure triangle consists of 3 settings that control the creative outcome of your photo. I want you to think about it that way. This is not a technical exercise. This is fun. These settings are creative tools. The setting I always think about first is aperture. The aperture is how wide your lens opens. It's also called f-stop, but that's a confusing technical way to think about it. The most important thing to remember about aperture is that it controls your depth of field. Yes, it lets more or less light in, but most professional photographers rarely think of it that way. A wide aperture has a shallow depth of field, like portrait mode on a phone. The subject will be in focus and the background will be blurry. A narrow aperture will have a deep depth of field, like a landscape photo. The rock in the foreground is in focus, but so are the mountains miles away. It's a creative decision. Aperture is the one choice most professionals will not allow their camera to make for them because it dramatically influences the story an image tells. A portrait is about the person. A landscape is about the landscape. Look at the difference between these 2 photos on my Substack page or in your email. The one on the left is a doll shot at a wide aperture f2.8. The one on the right uses a narrow aperture, probably f11 or f16. Other things affect depth of field, but please, no pedantry in the comments. I'm talking to beginners here. The subject is obvious in both images, but the aperture changes how the environment helps tell the story. The doll was in the woods, and the dreamy, out-of-focus leaves evoke the childlike story space of dolls and also complement the golden sunlight in her hair and shining through her sweater. The rose was in my mother's garden in the suburbs. Not only does the house give us context, the water on the leaves also has a relationship with the moody sky. The second part of the exposure triangle that I think about is shutter speed. It means literally how long does your shutter open for. A good camera shutter can open and shut in less than a millisecond or stay open for minutes. With a little imagination, you can see how a slow shutter would create blur, like those night photos of taillights streaking through the city streets or the soft waterfalls that landscape photographers love. You can also see why a hummingbird photographer would push their shutter to be as fast as possible. Again, the shutter controls the amount of light we let in, but that's not how most experienced photographers think about it. We think about the story we are telling. What is the story being told in these photographs? And again, you can reference my Substack page or your email. One image dramatically illustrates motion. The other freezes it in vivid detail. How might a different shutter speed have affected these images? The last part of the exposure triangle is less of a creative decision nowadays as cameras and processing software improve, and that is ISO. ISO adjusts how sensitive your camera sensor is. In the days of film, you would put a different ISO film in if you were going to shoot a concert at night versus a press conference on a sunny day. Digital cameras allow you to tell the sensor how sensitive to be. On a bright day outside, you will want a very low ISO, probably as low as the camera will go, 100 or sometimes 50. Astrophotographers often push their ISO as high as it will go to collect all the starlight they can get. The higher the ISO is, the more grain and noise the image will have, but lately, this is becoming less of a problem. I don't have examples of photos shot at different ISO settings because you probably wouldn't be able to tell anyway. Some gearheads will obsess over noise in images. Gearheads obsess over a lot of inconsequential things. Don't listen to them. You should use whatever ISO you need to capture your vision. You've made it through the exposure triangle alive. Now you're ready to learn what those settings are about. P is program mode, and I've never known a professional photographer who used it. Some people call it semi-automatic, and it allows the camera to control the aperture and shutter speed while you set a specific ISO or tell your camera that you want a brighter or a darker exposure. Most experienced photographers don't use it because it takes away perhaps the most important creative decision that you can make, which is aperture. If you use program mode, I'd love to hear why and how in the comments. That brings us to A or AV on a Canon, aperture priority. You tell the camera what aperture you would like to use, and it's up to the camera to control ISO and shutter speed to get the correct exposure. Aperture priority is a fantastic tool for amateur and seasoned photographers alike. The only problem you might run into is if there's not much light and your aperture is narrow, your camera will use a very slow shutter speed to let in enough light for the exposure. Things might get blurry. If you try out aperture priority, you will quickly learn when that might be a problem. S, or TV on a Canon, whatever that means, is shutter priority. You tell the camera how fast you want the shutter to move and let the camera make the rest of the technical decisions. I love this mode when things are happening quickly, like in this photo I've shared of a bagpiper on a windy day on the Royal Mile in Edinburgh. My shutter was set to 1/3200th of a second to freeze the wind's motion in his hat and kilt, and we were surrounded by tourists and chaos. There was lots of light, so I knew it wouldn't be a problem for the camera to correctly expose the shot. Shutter priority allowed me to focus on my composition without being distracted by all the different camera settings. And that brings us to M, or manual mode. You make all the decisions. No matter what photographers say on social media or in workshops, we rarely shoot in fully manual mode. If you are thinking about your camera, you are thinking about the wrong thing. What's in front of the camera is what we all should be thinking about. However, I often use manual mode in a sneaky, not fully manual way. On most professional cameras, you can set your ISO to auto. The camera will choose the appropriate sensitivity while you control the aperture and shutter speed. It takes experience to work both settings at once, and you can still overexpose on a sunny day if you're not careful. But this way of shooting gives me complete creative control. The exceptions who use manual mode quite a lot are studio photographers. They typically have a lot of time to set up and dial in settings and complete control over lighting. But even patient landscape photographers will be dealing with light that can change drastically in seconds. and typically choose to give the camera some control to ensure each image is properly exposed. That's it. Start by exploring those two modes, A or AV on a Canon and S or TV on a Canon. Take that camera out of the closet, charge the battery, put an SD card in it, and set it to one of those modes. I think you'll find that aperture is your most important creative decision, but there are times when you need to maintain a slow or fast shutter speed no matter what. When you had fun with that, try my auto ISO trick, or ISO, some people say ISO trick in manual mode. Most cameras allow you to change aperture and shutter speed with two different dials that you can easily access with a finger and a thumb. Once you learn where they are, it'll be no more difficult than using a phone camera, but exponentially more creative. Now, let me know how it goes. I'd love to answer your questions. Many people helped me when I was starting out. I can never repay them, but I can pass it on. Above all, tell your story. You're the only one who can. I'm taking 18 people with me to Scotland, July 2024, to learn about photography in some of the most beautiful places on Earth. People are already signing up. Please register soon if you'd like to go. It's at tracelesstours.com/photography tour with Jonathan, and there are hyphens between all those words. It's a lot. Please look at the Substack page, or look at your email, or look at the transcript in the podcast app that you're in right now, and you'll see that URL. Go to that website, register. We'd love to have you with us. P.S. I don't get any money from you clicking on this link that's in my Substack and in my email, but these SD cards are great. The SanDisk 128 gigabyte Extreme Pro. Not all SD cards work well when you're clicking fast or if you have a camera that does video too. These have never failed me, not once, and I have an Amazon link if you read this. Thanks for reading. This post is public, so feel free to share it. Anybody can listen to it, and this is a reader-supported podcast and publication. To receive new posts and support my work, consider going on Substack and becoming a free or a paid subscriber. They pay the bills. Thanks so much. I'm Jonathan Byrd. We'll see you next time. Have fun.